So we're on chapter 15, and this section of the chapter focuses on assignment number 4 and social and emotional development in adolescence. And so adolescent self-concept begins to become increasingly differentiated. They're thinking of themselves in regards to different tasks or skills that they might be studying, like they might be good in math but bad in sports. And there are varied domains of their ideas about themselves. They have ideas in regards to school achievement, athleticism, their appearance. And they can get a bit confused about identity based on what others think, because they're getting different messages from parents, peers, teachers, aunts, uncles. Which messages do they believe, and who is their real self? So they're beginning to form a more complex self-concept. In early adolescence, they may use contradictory statements without resolving the conflict and compare themselves maybe to an ideal self. By middle adolescence, they may feel conflict about those contradictions in their self-descriptions, and peers might have a heavier influence on their ideas about themselves. In later adolescence, they form more high-order abstractions or ideas that coordinate those contrasting self-perceptions. They are okay with being better at one thing and not so good at another. They're less concerned about the opinions of their friends, more focused on their own beliefs and values, and as a result of that, their self-esteem or feeling of worth rises. So identity development is the adolescent stage of Erikson's psychosocial theory. And he says that identity development is the process in which an individual integrates personal characteristics such as self-concepts with a set of values and a set of future goals. And Erikson proposed that developing a sense of identity is, of course, the major task of adolescence. And so as he has a crisis in all of his other stages, like trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, and so on, the crisis in adolescence is identity. Individuals either achieve a sense of identity or remain confused about their adult roles. And so James Marcia took Erikson's identity stage and looked at how identity is formed in adolescence. And he says there are 4 statuses. There's identity achievement, identity moratorium, identity foreclosure, and identity diffusion. And so these statuses are determined by whether an adolescent explores possibilities of their identity and if they have made a commitment. And so in this table, we can see those different statuses in regards to those 2 aspects of their decision. So if they have achieved their identity, then they've explored the possibilities and made a decision or a commitment. But if they've made a commitment and they have not explored, that's identity foreclosure. For example, if all of the adults in their family are teachers and they are expected to be a teacher themselves, they might have made a commitment to that without really exploring whether there might be other things that they would be more interested in doing. For identity moratorium, the individual has been exploring their options, but hasn't made a commitment yet. And that might be what you're doing in your coursework. You're focusing on your general education classes and looking at your options as far as a major, but you haven't made a commitment yet on a major. So you're in identity moratorium. And then not exploring and not committing is identity diffusion. So with diffusion, you're not looking for any answers nor seeking any answers. So then, thinking about those identity statuses, we're going to take a look at two aspects of identity, and there are many more aspects of identity. So there's gender identity. So gender intensification in adolescence, they're more have a self-consciousness about their gender. They're more aware of gender expectations. Physical appearance can be a predictor of their overall self-worth when it comes to gender identity. Boys tend to rate themselves higher in appearance and athleticism than girls, and generally have more positive ideas about themselves. Girls rated themselves higher in social competence. Media or movies, advertisements, video games tend to shape standards of physical appearance, influence dissatisfaction with body images. When it comes to academic and career aspirations, these tend to be more stereotyped in adolescence. Boys have higher self-esteem in math and science fields and place higher values on these fields on average, and girls are underrepresented in math and science and place less value on these fields and higher values on reading. Another type of identity is ethnic identity. And so this is a model of ethnic identity formation that was proposed in 1989. And so when it comes to ethnic identity in early adolescence, often the adolescent hasn't really examined that identity aspect. Moratorium is they're searching in middle adolescence of what that identity is, and then achieved or committed in older adolescence. And that, as you might have noticed, follows Marcia's identity statuses to some extent. And then resolution of ethnic identity issues. One resolution would be assimilation, where the individual identifies with the majority culture, not necessarily their own culture. Marginal means living in the majority culture but feeling alienated. Separated is identifying with their own ethnicity and rejecting the majority culture. And bicultural is identifying with both the minority and the majority cultures. Influences in regard to ethnic identity include parents and families, schools, and sometimes discrimination that is involved with ethnic identities. And then there is an oppositional identity, which devalues what the dominant group values. And so this pie chart looks at different age groups from 12 to 24 and how many are in the different of Marcia's identity statuses. And so you can see from 12 to 14, only 22% and 46% are diffused. And you're going to see more identity achieved, 15 to 16, and we're just going to see these change. More and more are going to be identity achieved. So something we want to keep in mind about these statuses is this changes throughout our lifetime. Like we might decide we're interested in, as far as our identity in regards to our career, we might might pick one career in early adulthood, but then decide to change later on. So identity development may occur more in early adulthood than in adolescent. And so another theorist, Jeffrey Arnett, proposed a new period called emerging adulthood, where there are two cycles. In adolescent, they explore the two cycles of exploring and committing would be an adolescent looks at the breadth, and then in early adulthood, they look more at the depth of their decision. Okay, so now we're going to move to parent-child relationships. And in adolescence, there's often a great deal of conflict between parents and children. But primarily, these are about mundane issues like personal appearance, dating, and curfews. And remember, we talked about in the cognitive chapter the development of argument skills, and it's an important aspect of cognitive development. And so really, parents need to pick their battles, which is more important. Seldom are the arguments or conflicts about core values like academic achievement, work, or religion. And there are three patterns of parent-adolescent conflict. There's the frequent squabblers, which have a high rate of conflict, but it's mildly tense. There's the placid pattern, where there are rare conflicts. And then there's the tumultuous pattern, where there's frequent conflicts of extreme intensity. So on a positive note, conflict may strengthen relationships. When we talk about the different parenting styles, authoritative tends to be one of the most common, and unfortunately disengaged parenting style is the other more common. Attachment styles, there's secure, and that's the one we'd want to find. And then there's insecure dismissing, or insecure preoccupied in attachment. And something that parents need to keep in mind, that even though adolescents push parents away, parents shouldn't get frustrated and completely give up, but just persist, because they still need you. So how do we negotiate these issues? Well, we need to establish a new equilibrium and negotiate boundaries. And so giving them increased independence, and they tend to have a greater need for privacy. In Western culture expects fewer restrictions and greater autonomy. They spend less time with families, more time with peers, and greater mobility, and it's much more difficult to monitor activities. There's a need for parents to balance then that adolescent autonomy and parent control. So foster self-control in the teens, but also monitor so you know where they are and what's going on. And then authoritative parenting is linked to social competence and well-adjusted adolescence. And remember, they're authoritative, lets the child have input, but the parent makes the final decision. So there's similar rates of conflict for sons and daughters, but mother-adolescent relationships tend to be more intense and have more conflict. And part of that is that mothers still tend to do the majority of the parenting, percentage-wise. Father-adolescent relationships tend to be more distant when compared to mothers and more superficial in their interactions. And the effects on conflict long-term, these relate more to how conflict is managed and resolved than in regards to the content. So parents need to think about the resolution skills. So then relationships with peers. Peer groups in adolescence develop a sort of culture with norms and values. And this culture encourages conformity to group rules, and it can have both a negative and positive effects. So there are two different types of cultures in adolescence. There's the cliques, which are small friendship-based groups, and an individual may belong to more than one clique. Membership helps establish an individual status. And then there are crowds, and crowds are larger, more reputation-based, and has status symbols related to it. So sharing different clothing types, attitudes about school and smoking. And for example, the groups might be jocks or adolescents participating in sports activities, the brains, which would be adolescents that enjoy academic activities, or partiers that like to do fun recreational activities. Crowds give opportunities to expand networks of friends, and affiliations, though, tend to fade in late adolescence when it comes to crowds. By age 16, 55% of boys and 64% of girls report being in a romantic relationship in the last 18 months. And there are three subgroups in regards to romantic relationships. There's the early starters, which is about 21.4%. The on-timers, which is 52.3%. And then the late bloomers, which is 26.4%. And then when it comes to friendships and how that affects youth development, adolescents value similar qualities in friends as they did in middle childhood. Boys and girls continue to have different interaction styles. A peer influence is moderated by family interactions, but friends can have both positive and negative influences. And part of that has to do with co-rumination, and that's just reminding each other of the problems that they have and focusing on that. And idealism, it can become more negative. And then also deviancy training. If friends are involved in activities that break the law or that have to do with alcohol and drugs, that can have also a negative influence on adolescents.